So I recently had a request from Torque House, thank you buddy, to do a video on how I installed my RAM mount, and I can certainly do that. That's not a whole lot to it. Basically what you have to decide is whether you're going to get a RAM mount that has the clamps that mount onto the bars or a stem mount. And I can tell you on the Ninja 1000 you're going to have to do a stem mount because you got no room to mount anything on the bars, really. I'll probably just get back home at some point in time and just take mine off and show you how it's on. It's pretty simple. It's very simple.
Okay, so I recently had a request to show how I installed the XRam mount on my 2017 Ninja 1000. I believe there are two types of these RAM mounts, and one was a clamp type that clamps onto the bars, and the other is the stem mount. And as you can see on the bars, there's really no room to put a clamp, so I went with the stem mount, which is pretty simple in design. So it's always helpful to have the right tools. I've got a set of these hex bits, and most people will have some sort of hex keys laying around, but it's a 3mm is the right size. And as you can see, my garage is a complete disaster right now because I'm remodeling my kitchen, and everything's a freaking mess right now. So if it appears like I'm completely disorganized, it's true. I am. Okay, so the way this works is pretty simple. You've got your screw in the center, and I'm gonna just loosen that up while I put the camera down.
A few moments later.
And you don't have to take the screw all the way out. It's not going to thread all the way out. So you just want to get it to the point where you take enough of the compression off of the rubber bushing, if you will. Okay, so you normally have a plastic cap that goes over the stem, so that's obviously got to be removed. But what you've got with this thing is the stem, and you've got a little nut at the end and a piece of rubber in the center. And when you buy this mount, the rubber's actually a little bit longer than that, so you cut it to the right length. The instructions will tell you what length you should cut it to, but basically it's about an inch long. So as you can see with this nut at the end, when you tighten this screw, it expands the piece of rubber inside of the stem, and that's what holds it in. So it's really just that simple. So obviously installation, you're just going to push this thing down as far in as you can get it. And I don't know how well you can see that, but you should be able to get the rubber piece all the way down into the stem. And then once it is down there, obviously you want to tighten this back up. That'll expand the rubber back out and hold it in place. You won't actually feel this thing really getting tight to the point where it's just gonna stop turning. So it's in there good. So a couple other things. Here's something that I installed, which is a throttle lock, and it's a Kyoko brand, I believe. But I'll put a link in the description where I got that. But this is nice for me. I was in an accident about a year ago, shattered my wrist, and got a nice steel plate and a bunch of screws. But so if I ride for any period of time and my wrist gets sore, so the way this works is you just tighten the lock backwards, and as you screw this back, it pushes a bushing onto the throttle tube, which will lock your throttle into whatever position that you want it to be in. So it's a inexpensive cruise control, and then when you roll that back, it takes the pressure off of the throttle tube and releases the throttle. So it's a nice cruise control. So this little USB charger was a nice add-on just to keep my phone charged. I usually ride around listening to Pandora and whatever. So another thing I got was the Ninja 1000 tank guard, which was a Kawasaki factory accessory, and quite frankly it was probably more expensive than it needed to be. I think I had actually paid like 60, maybe even 70 bucks for it, but I liked it a lot better than a lot of the other tank guards, and it's not the same tank guards you see on everybody else's bike, so I thought it was worth this expense. And back to the Yoshi fender eliminator. The stock fender was this big piece of plastic that sticks way down over the tire. I thought looked really kind of ridiculous, so this Yoshi fender eliminator kit was a nice little add-on that kind of cleans up the tail end, and I just think it looks a lot better. It's got a nice LED light, and it uses the same factory turn signals, so you do have to do a little bit of work to get this thing installed. You have to take, obviously, the original fender off, and to do that you have to remove both the grab rails, both the seats. This whole back plastic piece has to come off to get to the bolts that are at the top, and then you've got bolts underneath. You've got to splice the wire, and if you're not mechanically inclined, then you probably want to take that to somebody else to mess with. But it took me about, I don't know, an hour or so to get it done. And there again, I've got the green LEDs. I tried to keep all the installation stuff that I mounted onto this one side, mainly so I'm not putting holes all over the bike. If I do go to replace this, it's just this one piece of plastic that I can replace without having a bunch of holes in it. Now, another nice thing about this particular bike, or a lot of the Kawasaki's that use the detachable saddlebags, or panniers as they're called, these were really nice. These were actually off of my 2014 that was totaled, and since I had the same candy lime green paint, they switched over to this bike. It's the exact same setup, so if anyone has not seen how these work, basically mine have locks that were actually keyed to my old 2014, and when the bike was totaled, I didn't really think about the panniers I had at home in the garage when the bike was totaled, obviously. But when I turned the key in, when they totaled the bike out, I didn't think about the fact that I needed the key for the locks on the bags. So as it turned out, it really wasn't a big deal. You would think that you could go to a Kawasaki dealer and they would just give you keys. You can order a new lock set for these, but I found that I didn't even need to do that. So I took these to a locksmith, and he basically took the lock mechanism out by disassembling the case, the pannier, and he was able to re-key the existing lock to my new key for this bike. So, and I think I'm pretty sure he charged me like 15 bucks to do that. So if you haven't seen how these work, basically, you know, you've got your key. If it's locked, you got a latch, very simple latch mechanism, and they plug into the grab rails. And latches down, and it's locked. Now that also locks the door actually from opening, so to unlock it, you got this lever, flip the lever, and as you can see, I've got a K&N air filter that I have still yet to install on the bike. Should probably get around to doing that sometime. Maybe I'll make a video about that. Okay, so yeah, again, if you haven't seen these before, this is what you're going to be looking like with the panniers. And granted, mine are filthy because, again, I've been remodeling my kitchen and the garage is a disaster, as is the rest of the house. So you do need to be a little bit cautious of the fact that you're going to be wider with the bags on. And so another accessory that I bought for this bike that I have actually not yet installed are these replacement levers. And the reason why I have not yet installed them is, quite frankly, I wanted to do a little bit more research to make sure that by putting these aftermarket levers on that I wasn't somehow going to run into problems with burning up the clutch. I don't think it's going to be an issue, but I do know that they're going to mount a little bit differently than the factory levers. So if you've got a Ninja 1000, I'd be willing to bet that you probably are as happy as I am with the clutch on these bikes. Is so smooth. It's extremely smooth. And I've had a lot of other bikes before, and by far, just the action on this clutch is really nice and smooth. So here's a few things that I really love about this bike. Number one, first and foremost for me, is the riding position. As you can see, the seat is a lot lower. You're not in a leaning over the tank position so much. You're more of an upright position, which is what Kawasaki marketed this bike as, a sport touring motorcycle. And so yeah, the riding position is purposely designed to be a little bit more comfortable than say a ZX14 or another more of a sport bike. So for me, that was probably the biggest selling point. Another factor that I really liked was the fact that I could take the saddlebags and attach those or take them off easily. Again, the clutch actuation on this thing is awesome. It's really smooth. The bike has obviously got a lot of power. And the 2017, they upgraded the IMU inertia module unit. I don't know what the hell that stands for. But I believe they took the IMU off of the ZX10s, and that was one of the upgrades to this bike. Another thing different on the 2017 model is the instrument cluster, and they basically added a gear indicator and a clock, which sounds dumb enough, I guess, but having had a 2014 before where I didn't have a gear indicator or a clock, I actually found that to be a pretty cool little upgrade. So other than that, the 2017 has not had, I don't believe, much other in the way of changes. The plastics have changed a bit, so there's a bit of a difference in the fairing design, which I think I like better. I think it looks a little more aggressive than the 2014 that I had. And then 15 and 16s also were a little bit different than the 2017 that had changed. So the installation on the Kyoko throttle lock, seemingly very simple. Basically, you've got a Phillips screw in the bar end, and I will tell you that as simple as it would seem, they actually Loctite those screws into the bars. So if you're going to try to install something like this, or if you're even going to remove your bar end for some reason, keep in mind, and you can see mine's kind of boogered up there, but I had actually broke a couple of bits trying to get that off. And if you're going to use, I wouldn't recommend a screwdriver with a Phillips head. Probably better to get a ratchet with a Phillips bit on the end of it, something that you can really get a hold of and put a bite on, and maybe even put a cheater bar or something on the end of your ratchet to help get that off, because yeah, I had a little bit of a struggle getting that off. And it's always the seemingly simplest shit that you go to work on that turns into be a big pain in the ass. And I don't know why that is, but you know, that's just the way working on things goes sometimes. So another little device that I bought, which I think is really nice to have, is this. This is a Stockton brand, but you can get these things in other brands. But it's a, obviously it's a lock. And if you've not seen these before and how they work, you have actually a battery inside of this. Yeah, so if you've not seen how these things work, basically they just lock onto your front rotor. And so key, and then you push it in. And obviously it's got a battery with an alarm. And the way this works is it locks on to your rotor. So once it's locked onto your rotor, somebody comes along and messes with the bike and messes this thing around. Depending on, I guess, where you live and how susceptible your bike is to be stolen. I don't live in a particularly bad area, but still, you know, it's not uncommon for people to drive around in pickup trucks, and you get a couple of big enough guys, they could pick a bike up and throw it in the back of a truck and have it stripped down and sold on eBay for, you know, a decent amount of money. Now, this is a bigger bike, so for a couple of guys to pick up this bike and put it in the back of a truck is probably not going to be the easiest of all things, unless there's some pretty big guys. But still, nevertheless, whenever I'm out in a questionable area, I do like to use an alarm wheel lock. Now, an important thing to remember if you're going to use one of these, and typically they will come with it, mine came with it, this orange cable. And what that does is that you run the cable on one end of the lock, and then you run the other end of the cable up onto your hand grip, or somewhere on the bike. You could run it up to actually the key if you wanted. The purpose is to remind you that the lock is on the rotor, because if you forget you put a wheel lock on your bike and you come out of the store, you jump on the bike and you go to take off, you're gonna fuck some shit up. So keep in mind, if you're gonna use a wheel lock, probably should use the little accessory cable that comes with it. Alright, well, I hope that someone found this to be useful, and I do appreciate any comments or feedback, and on that note, I'm going to call this quits. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.